Pichai went back home and immediately reached out to his lawyer friend for help with filing charges. He was sure that his father-in-law and his ex-wife had been playing games with him the whole time they were married, but now it was finally becoming clear. Pichai had caught Wassenaar kissing her father twice, but at the time, it was hard to take action since there was no solid evidence. However, now that Wassenaar was pregnant, Pichai saw an opportunity. He could push for a DNA test to prove the truth. During their almost 2 years of marriage, Pichai was never allowed to get close to Wassenaar in that way. He couldn't even hug her without being rejected, let alone have any kind of intimate relationship. Now the situation had taken a new turn, and Pichai was determined to uncover what had really been going on. Hey there! Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into another real-life story that's as chilling as it is mind-blowing. This one comes all the way from Tongiai City in Myanmar, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this. It's a crazy tale full of twists that'll leave you wondering, what the heck actually happened here? Let's get into the details and break it down. You won't want to miss this one. Before we jump into the story, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to share this story with your friends. The more, the better. Now, let's get into it. So, the story goes like this. There was a man named Munkle, born in 1960, who had a pretty impressive career as a police officer in Yonkan before moving to Tongiai. He was a sharp-looking guy, dashing, handsome, and had that authority about him. In 1984, Munkle got married, and a couple of years later, in 1986, his daughter Wassenaar was born. Unfortunately, in 2000, Munkle's wife passed away, and it brought him even closer to his daughter. Wassenaar grew up with a lot of love, and by 2003, Munkle sent her off to a well-known university to study economics. After she graduated, Wassenaar became a teacher at a local private junior high school, a position offered by some of her father's business associates. In that area, there weren't many opportunities for women, especially in office jobs. But Wassenaar loved working with kids, so teaching was a perfect fit. The bond between Munkle and Wassenaar was incredibly tight, almost too close for comfort. Some family members and friends started whispering that their relationship might have crossed the line, even suggesting it was more than just father and daughter. To clear up those rumors, Munkle started getting close to a widow named Ratchani in 2012. She was 11 years younger than him, and at the time, Munkle was retired, managing a bunch of rice fields his nephews helped run. For Ratchani, securing her future and having someone to spend her later years with seemed like a good deal. After a brief 4-month courtship, Munkle, at 53, married Ratchani, who was 42. Ratchani also brought her 19-year-old daughter Varoda to live with them. Things, however, were a bit tense between Wassenaar and her new half-sister. Wassenaar, feeling a little betrayed, thought Ratchani and Varoda were just after a comfortable life and didn't genuinely love her father. Varoda, on the other hand, was trying to be friendly and build a connection with her new sister, but Wassenaar wasn't having any of it. Wassenaar would often ignore her, barely acknowledging her attempts at bonding. Ratchani and Varoda tried to stay positive, hoping that Wassenaar would eventually warm up and adjust to her new family. They even enrolled Varoda in college in 2013, something Munkle was proud to do for her. But Wassenaar felt resentment building, thinking her father was spending too much money on his new wife's daughter. Sometimes, she wouldn't even come home and would be impossible to reach. She didn't like the new family dynamic, and things just weren't improving. After nearly a year of tension, Wassenaar didn't show up for 2 weeks. Munkle got really sick worrying about her. It wasn't until Wassenaar heard her father was in the hospital that she finally came to visit, crying to see how much weight he had lost. But things came to a head in April 2014, when a huge fight broke out between Wassenaar and her stepmother Ratchani. The argument was loud and messy. It was Ratchani who tried to open up first, apologizing if her marriage to Munkle had hurt Wassenaar's feelings. She told Wassenaar that she wasn't trying to replace her late mother, but just wanted to be there for her father and help care for her. Wassenaar, though, wasn't having it. She flat out rejected her stepmother, saying she didn't like her, didn't want her there, and only wished she would leave. It was clear, the tension between Wasana and Rachini was just getting worse. At 28, Wasana felt like everything in her life had been taken away since Rachini and Viroda came into the picture. Her father's attention, her time, her money, you name it. Despite Munkle always trying to play mediator between the two, Wasana became more and more reluctant to go home. Finally, in 2015, Rachini, with a heavy heart, asked for a separation from Munkle. They had been married for 3 years, but it was clear neither of them had been truly happy. In fact, towards the end, Munkle would often sleep in Wasana's room to try and win back his daughter's affection, leaving Rachini feeling even more alone. Their bond was just too strong, and Wasana, who had grown up practically alone with her father since she was 14, wasn't ready to let go. It was a bit strange though. Wasana was almost 30 and still wanted her father to act as her protector, almost like she was still a little girl. Eventually, Rachini went back to her hometown, but she asked Munkle if he could help support Viroda's education until she graduated. Rachini didn't have the money for it, so Munkle agreed to help, saying he'd treat Viroda like his own daughter. After a year, in February 2016, the couple officially divorced, with Rachini signing the papers. Viroda stayed with Munkle, continuing her studies, though her relationship with Wasana was still pretty rocky. In 2017, Wasana started dating a man named Pichai, who was a year older than her. Pichai had been a soccer player before turning to refereeing and joining the Tongiai City Sports Union. But their relationship was tumultuous. Wasana was moody, spoiled, and had a short temper. For instance, when Pichai was late picking her up from work, she would stay at the office for 2 days. If he didn't reply to her messages fast enough, she would accuse him of cheating. When he didn't show up one Sunday night because it was drizzling, she blasted him with, "You said you'd go through a storm and cross the ocean for me, and now you're scared of a little rain?" It was like Pichai had to be Superman just to keep up with Wasana's demands. The couple broke up and made up countless times, but with Munkle's push and the promise that Pichai would eventually buy a house and a car, they finally got married in May 2018, when Wasana was 32 and Pichai was 33. The first 2 months of their marriage seemed okay, but Pichai quickly realized that he had to tread carefully when it came to Wasana. She began spending more and more time at her father's house, and eventually, Pichai was forced to stay with his in-laws just to be with his wife. During this time, Pichai witnessed just how rude Wasana was to her half-sister Viroda. Viroda, who was doing an internship at a bank, often got harsh comments from Wasana, like, "You don't need to live here, you're getting paid for your internship." Viroda, trying to avoid drama, simply said she wanted to take care of her dad. But Wasana wasn't having it. "I'll take care of you. You don't need to come home every day. I'll just move in with my husband." Viroda, who didn't make much from her internship, eventually admitted that if she could go home to save money, she would. But Wasana wouldn't let her. So Viroda ended up staying at a friend's house and would only come back to see her father when he needed help with his medicine. She visited about once a week, while Pichai had to keep moving in and out of his in-laws' house. He hated it, but with Wasana never coming home, he had no choice but to stay. It all came to a head in April 2020 when the pandemic hit. Pichai was stuck at home, unemployed, and struggling with no income. To make matters worse, he was being constantly ignored by his wife, Wasana. She wouldn't even sleep next to him anymore. Things were tense, and everyone was holed up at Mr. Munkle's house because of the lockdown, including Viroda. Pichai had plenty to vent about, especially to his sister-in-law. He couldn't understand why Wasana was so comfortable sleeping with her father, of all people. Sure, Munkle was her dad, but she was grown now and married. It just felt wrong. Viroda, after hearing his frustration, shared a bit of her own story. She told Pichai that her mother, Rachini, had faced the same situation. Munkle had preferred sleeping with Wasana rather than with Rachini, which eventually led to their divorce. In June 2020, just 13 months after getting married, Pichai couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce. Wasana didn't seem too upset though. After all, she wasn't going to be seen as a spinster again. She had already been married once, so she felt fine about it. A year later, in April 2021, Varada moved out to live on her own, but she still visited her father regularly to check on him and bring him food. He had done a lot for her over the years, and she wanted to stay close. One morning in early May, while delivering some religious books her father had ordered, Varada was surprised to find the house in disarray. An errand boy mentioned there had been a wedding the night before, but when Varada asked her father about it, he said a relative had rented the house for the event. Varada didn't ask any more questions. She didn't really know her father's extended family. 5 months later, Varada noticed a change in Wasana. Her sister had gained some weight, and Varada couldn't help but think she was pregnant. But the baby couldn't possibly be Pichai's. He and Wasana had been divorced for a year and a half. So, was there a chance they were getting back together? Varada, for some reason, decided to message her ex-brother-in-law and ask him if he knew about Wasana's condition. Even though they weren't together anymore, Pichai was still invested in finding out the truth. If it turned out that Wasana was carrying Munkel's child, he wanted to know. He had already caught his ex-wife kissing her father twice, but it had been impossible to report without evidence. Now, with the pregnancy, a DNA test could reveal the truth. In early November 2021, Pichai visited Mr. Munkel's house and confronted Wasana. She admitted she was 6 months pregnant but refused to say who the father was. Pichai, frustrated and suspicious, reached out to a lawyer friend to help him file charges. He was convinced that his ex-wife and father-in-law had been hiding something from him. He knew they had been playing games while he was still married to Wasana, but it only seemed to come to light now, with her pregnancy. Pichai's lawyer friend said that, yes, a DNA test could be done to prove the paternity of the child, but there was a catch. If the test confirmed that Munkel was the father, only he would face consequences. A law passed in 2018 stated that if there was a despicable relationship involved, only the male party would be punished. It struck Pichai as strange and unfair, almost as if women who got involved in such relationships were seen as victims and not held accountable for their actions. On November 17, 2021, Pichai couldn't hold back anymore. After receiving a message from Varada, saying she'd been beaten and had a big argument with Wasana, he showed up at Mr. Munkel's house, ready to confront everyone. When he arrived, it was clear things had escalated. Wasana was furious, accusing Varada of telling Pichai everything, which she believed had led to Pichai coming back into the picture. She made it clear that Pichai wasn't her husband anymore and Varada wasn't even her real sister, so he had no business being there. But Pichai snapped. He couldn't keep quiet any longer. He shouted that he couldn't accept how his marriage had been. Never once was he touched. His father's property had been taken back, and worst of all, the disgusting actions he had witnessed between his ex-wife and her father. Before anyone could react, Mr. Munkel appeared, crying and shouting for everyone to calm down. But things quickly got out of control. In a sudden violent move, Wasana picked up a glass pitcher from the table and smashed it over Varada's head. The impact sent Varada crashing to the ground, her head bleeding heavily. Pichai, in a mix of anger and shock, pushed Wasana to the corner of the dining room and, in a fit of rage, repeatedly slammed her head against the wall. Mr. Munkel tried to intervene but was no match for Pichai's strength. Pichai then grabbed Wasana by the neck, and after a brief struggle, she went limp and collapsed to the floor. In his fury, he kicked Wasana in her stomach before rushing Varada to the hospital. Meanwhile, Mr. Munkel called for an ambulance. It took an hour for them to arrive, and they managed to get Varada to the hospital. Unfortunately, Wasana and her unborn child couldn't be saved. She passed away just 2 days later, at the age of 34. A week later, Pichai was arrested at his home without a struggle. As the investigation unfolded, Mr. Munkel finally admitted everything. He confessed that he had been in a special, inappropriate relationship with his daughter, Wasana, for years. It all started 9 years ago with a night that led to a horrific act. Over time, Wasana had become possessive of him, unable to let go, which is why she was so furious when he remarried. She had tried everything to get rid of her stepmother and even pushed her own sister out of their house. But the fact that Varada kept coming around to check on her father made Wasana increasingly angry. Munkel's lawyer stated that his client had tried to distance himself from Wasana, especially after the tension with Pichai. But Wasana wouldn't let go. She refused to let her father have a normal life with anyone else. She even made sure she wasn't intimate with Pichai during their marriage, all to avoid being seen as an old maid. She only wanted to use her marriage to avoid that label, and after the divorce, Pichai's resentment continued to simmer. He wanted payback for everything Wasana had done, including taking all of Munkel's assets and putting them in Pichai's name, something Wasana had cancelled after their divorce. But the most shocking revelation came when Munkel confessed that he had married his own son in May 2021. The wedding ceremony that Virada had witnessed was actually Munkel's wedding to Wasana. The child she was carrying was his, and it was all due to Wasana's coercion. She didn't want any other man in her life except for her father, believing she needed to replace her late mother, not some other woman. To make this twisted relationship official, Munkel enlisted the help of Mr. Virat, a former police officer from Tongiai. Together, they managed to trick everyone, including the guardian, headman, religious leaders, and witnesses, into believing that Munkel and Wasana's relationship was legitimate. The power of money and influence, it seems, can be terrifyingly effective in any country. Virada later spoke up in court, revealing that during the pandemic, she had witnessed Wasana and her stepfather engaging in some truly shocking behavior. She wanted to leave, but with everything being in lockdown and her being unemployed, she had no choice but to stay. She never told her mother in the village about what she'd seen, fearing it would make her ill. As for Pichai, he didn't openly say what he knew. He just gave a hint that Wasana was pregnant, but with no husband in sight, hoping that someone would figure it out for themselves. It was clear something strange had been going on in that house. Virada, in all honesty, really couldn't stand her sister. Wasana had always been mean to her, slapping her, throwing glasses, spitting at her, and the worst of it came when Wasana hit her with a glass teapot, sending her to the floor. But then there was Mr. Munkel. Her stepfather had always been kind to her. He paid for her education, secretly sent her money so Wasana wouldn't know, and would call her often just to check in on her. So, if Mr. Munkel was also punished, it would be heartbreaking for Virada. Pichai, on the other hand, believed that his actions were driven by years of resentment. The anger he had built up over time exploded, especially after Wasana hurt Virada so badly. How could a woman be so cruel to another woman? In a ruling made on May 20, 2022, the Tongiai City High Court found Pichai guilty of assaulting Wasana, though it was in defense of his former sister-in-law Virada. The 36-year-old was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but could apply for bail after serving at least 10 years. Mr. Munkel received a 3-year sentence for his role in the misconduct, while Mr. Virat, who had helped falsify documents to facilitate the marriage, was sentenced to 4 months in prison. As for the estate, 50% of Mr. Munkel's assets went to Virada, his stepdaughter, with the other half being divided among relatives and friends. What lessons can we learn from this story?